Well, thank you all for coming out to share stories about our families. It's so important that we talk about where we came from and who our families are, and I'm very grateful for that.
My father was Clarence Timothy, and he was a full-blood Chickasaw. He was a police officer for many years.
Oh, really? Where was he a police officer?
In Wynnewood and Pauls Valley, and also was a taxi driver. My mom is Rosalie Byers Imitachi, and she was a homemaker. And she went to an Indian school, Shilako. My dad didn't go to school. I think when they took him to Shilako, they said he made it back home before they did, so.
He could have done good in track.
Yeah, exactly. I said, well, how did that happen? And they said, oh, you only had to know your dad when he was little. My mom was in the Catholic schools, was raised in the Catholic schools, and then when she was old enough, she went to Shilako. She told every one of us kids, there was 6 of us, or 7, and she told us, she said, I want every one of you to get an education, because she said an education is something they can't take away from you. And of course, we didn't have a lot growing up. We lived in Sulphur and went to school there in Sulphur. And I remember when the man from the school, from Carter Seminary, would come down, and he'd try to get my mom to send us to the boarding school at Carter. And she'd have us kids to all go outside, out in the backyard. And we all thought we were hiding out from him, like he was gonna get us. Oh, but she said, no, you kids are not going to the boarding school. So we went to school there in Sulphur all of our lives.
My mother, she went into Catholic boarding school in Anadarko when she was 5 because her mother had died in Phoenix, Arizona. My grandfather had taken my grandmother from around the Stratford area. She got sick, sold his allotment land, bought a Model T touring car, and they went to Phoenix, Arizona. But she died. Mom was 5, came back here to live with her grandmother, and then her grandmother got sick. And my Chickasaw grandfather was still in Phoenix, and so the only place she could go was to the Catholic boarding school. She was 5, and you said something that reminded me of some of her story, that she said that when they went, she had long hair, and that was kind of a treasured thing among Native women with their hair. And they made all of them cut their hair very short and kind of a page boy look. And they all wore the same little black dresses. Everybody was dressed alike. So there's a story later. We have 6 children. Our youngest daughter, who looks the most Native of all of them, when she was about the same age, one summer she got a little page boy haircut, and we gone to see my mom. My mom got so mad. She was just so angry. Why would you cut her hair? Like, why would you cut her hair? And we didn't understand that her seeing that was taking her back to that time when she was in the Catholic school, in the boarding school. And it was a rough time for her because she didn't get to go home during the summers at all. Very little family came to see her, and it was a really, really much of a struggle. And one of the things she came out of that with was the fact that she didn't think she could amount to anything. In fact, she was told that. She said, you savages can't learn anything. You'll never amount to anything. And so that really impacted my mom throughout her life, well into adulthood. And so it was a very, very interesting time, very traumatic time for her. I'm curious about some of the rest of you. What are some of your experiences, maybe?
Well, I grew up in Fillmore, mostly on my grandmother's lot of land, and then later on we rented some property that adjoined that land. My father, Benjamin Nail, he was full-blood Chickasaw. My mother was Fern Hurt. She was, well, actually, she was a 1/8 Cherokee. He's a farmer, and later on, he did heavy construction out west, Arizona, New Mexico, all up and down the west coast. So he was gone a lot, up until about 7 years old, I guess. And that's when our family moved over to Tishomingo, and we stayed with my mother's parents, our grandparents over there. So, and he was my grandfather, Roy Hurt. He was a 1/4 Cherokee, and he ran a produce. He bought milk and vegetables and eggs and things like that. And he's also justice of the peace there in Tishomingo. But we grew up right across the street from the old Capitol building. Right now, it's where they serve the meal during the annual meeting. That was where our home, my grandfather's home was. And so we grew up playing over there with what we called the courthouse. Then there was a county courthouse. We'd go over there and we had football. We'd play football. We played baseball. We'd hit golf balls around. Do a little bit of everything over there. And that was like generations. I was talking with a gentleman here earlier from Tishomingo, and he remembered some of the football games that we used to have there. And I told him, I said, yeah, I don't know how many windows we broke out of that courthouse. But they'd replace them, and they never would tell us not to play. So as soon as they kind of blew over, I guess, we'd run and hide until they got everything replaced. And we'd go back and start playing again, and nobody ever said anything. But
I'm sure they didn't think it was y'all.
they knew exactly who it was. Yeah, growing up in Fillmore, it's kind of like growing in two worlds, I guess. You know, I had my paternal grandparents there. They were full-blood Chickasaw, and growing up on their allotted land, and then moving over to Tishomingo, it was more or less the white world, I guess. A lot of good memories there. We had quite a family. Not as big as her family.
Yeah, Sherry, how many's in your family? Tell us about your family.
My mother and father, my mom only went to the 8th grade, and my dad only went to the 3rd grade. I think he went to school at, I think it's called Bullard Chapel or Prairie View, somewhere back there towards Milburn. And my mom, I think, went to Carter a couple of years, maybe up until the 8th grade or 7th grade. And she had to quit school so she could be a cook at another school. And she was a cook for the school, for the children. And they had to go to work, I guess.
So your mom left Carter Seminary to go work at another school?
At a school,
in 8th grade?
In 8th grade, yeah, she was a cook.
Wow. I can't even imagine a school letting an 8th grader do that.
Well, they needed money, and that's the reason why a lot of them, they quit schools to go to work, because they needed the money. And anyway, my mom grew up around Ada area, High Hill, Loso area. And my dad grew up around Milburn, Tishomingo area, Fillmore. So there was, altogether, there was 11 of us kids.
Only 11.
Only 11. But we had a lot of fun. I mean, we grew up there at Cornville, and I mean, the land, it was like our land, more or less, and we fished and played ball and went swimming in the creeks, and I mean, that's just where we grew up. And my grandmother and our great-grandfather and grandmother, they lived up the road, and we had some friends who lived a little ways from us. So there was actually 4 families, and we called it the village. It was like if you look at Fish Hook, we were at the end. We were the last house. And when we left there, we moved to Ada, and then we moved to Tishomingo. Tishomingo's where I graduated. 2 houses. I lived 2 houses from Quanah.
So is that how y'all met then, too?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where we ended up in Tishomingo, and I think my mom then moved to Mansfield for just about, I don't know, 6 months, but not very long, and then they moved back. But and we also lived in Dallas on a relocation for 6 months, and that was it. I mean, it was like when you lived in the woods and then you go to a city, it's just like night and day, and it was an experience. But
So you were a kid when they did the relocation? What do you remember about that?
we moved. They sent us to Dallas. I was 11 years old. We moved there in '63, right after President Kennedy was killed. It was in December. When we got there, I guess it was like everybody's getting off work, and we were going right down Main Street, and everybody's head was out the window, like the Beverly Hillbillies. Yeah, we were all going down there, call the building. But we got there, and it was, I guess, almost closing time, so they put us in a motel, and the first thing we saw as kids was the elevator, and the next day, I guess my mom and dad had to go and I guess figure out where we were going to live and do all that paperwork, and we went up and down the elevator. I mean, that was fun. I mean, we never been in an elevator. They're probably glad when we left, but it was okay. But that was pretty much.
Do you remember what kind of work your folks were doing?
I don't remember what they had my dad doing, but the government was always trying to get him to do something other than what he was, I mean, I don't know. They tried to make him a farmer one time, and I don't know, they sent him to Dallas, but we only stayed there 6 months, and I was glad when we moved back.
Do you know if you were treated differently if you received your education at boarding schools?
Well, I know that my mother said that she only finished the 9th grade, and I always think that she had wished that she could have gone further. And I think that later in life she looked back, and because she'd been told she couldn't accomplish anything, and I think she looked back later and thought, I wish I'd done more. And so, like, when I graduated high school and then eventually went to college and graduated and did a master's degree and a doctoral degree and all these things, that was a real sense of pride for her to see that her kids were accomplishing things. I think she saw that she could have done more because my folks, we grew up poor. They both worked. My father's a carpenter. She worked as a driver. It was hard work. It was hard manual labor. And not that that was a bad thing at all, but I think she later in life realized she could have done more, that she really was a person of value.
Women back then did have to be very strong to go through what they went through.
Indeed.
Going to the Indian schools and not having a lot of support. And so, I mean, they knew they had to make it if they were going to, make it in life. So, I really think that's probably the reason my mother would never let us go to a boarding school.
I'm sure. Sherry, what's something that you just remember from your mom or your grandmother just teaching you, something that has always stayed with you?
She did a lot of sewing, and I learned how to sew from her. Hymns, chocolate hymns, she could sing. Whenever she cooked, sewed, whatever, she would always be singing all the time. So I more or less, I still hear her when I hear the songs. I can hear her singing those songs, and I just remember her making butter with a churn, and she would help us pour the the milk or whatever it was we poured in there and beat it and taste the butter. I can still taste the butter.
You talking about speaking in Indian. My mama couldn't speak Choctaw, but she could sing in Choctaw. And so she would sing to all of us kids, and one of the grandkids, she was rocking. Well, and then she started singing. He said, oh no, Granny, I don't want to go to sleep. He knew it was time to go to sleep, but she said, oh no.
Here's the hymns, it's time to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, goodness.
What differences do you see in today's Native youth compared to then?
Well, the main difference, I think, is the opportunity, I guess, that they have, you know, through education and different programs that the tribe has, all the different cultural camps and things that they can go to attend. And it's like I say before, you know, when I was growing up, there was no tribal government. That's people just. You just worked. You were just part of society. You had to go out and make a living. There were some benefits like the BIA, or they had a hospital in Tallahassee that if you had to go to the doctor, you might be able to go down there. But other than that, we went to the same doctors that everybody else went to. We paid the same fees that everybody else paid. You know, but you know, the opportunities that kids and the tribal members have today is just, and it's like overwhelming, you know. Just about any needs you have, you can probably find some program to help you with. So.
Yes.
My kids have all benefited greatly. I have a daughter who's just getting ready to graduate from dental hygiene school here in a few weeks, and the Chickasaws have been very beneficial in her being able to do what she's doing, and she'll hopefully have her Chickasaw graduation stole to wear at that event. And my son, my oldest son now, is teaching tennis. And one of the things he got to do last year, it was really neat for him, is that this organization he works for, the Chickasaw Nation, brought all of their summer tennis program to Oklahoma City, and he conducted their tennis camp. And so they all have this sense of, if you will, Chickasaw pride now, which I think is neat.
The opportunities like this is there for the Chickasaw Nation. I wish it was there when I was growing up. Like Quanah says, we grew up and there was no tribal government at all.
Well, I really appreciate everybody for coming and for sharing. And sometimes it's difficult to talk about things, but I think it's very important. And the stories are very important for this next generation. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Raylee.
Thank you for sharing.